The world is shifting. Inspiration is everywhere. We learn about the best in ourselves from each other. I'm Will McPherson, and you've hit rock bottom. Building your health and happiness from the ground on up. I'd like to introduce Gary Davis, a project management professional, certified project manager with over 30 years of experience. Gary, welcome to the show. And how are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing great. Good morning, William. Nice to see you.
Good to see you. So I always wonder, right? So I've known you for a while and you've been doing project management forever. So what you've learned in 30 plus years doing project management, can that all apply? Can you apply that to your personal life? I mean, is there a crossover?
Yeah, good question. For sure. Lots of things that you learn as a project manager about organizing people and activities to try to achieve a goal certainly come into play in your personal life. Every day you have to get somewhere by a certain time. You're working on a project and you kind of have to think through sort of the activities you need to do in order to finish it.
All right. Well, let's think about one, right? Can you think about one project that you needed to get together, let's say with your family, right? Something happened and, you all got together and you needed a common goal and you had a time constraint. Can you think of anything that happened in your life that you needed to get a project done with your family?
Yeah. So a couple of years ago, my father passed away.
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, so thank you. And he had an estate, and that estate had to go through a settlement process. And
that sounds complicated. That sounds complicated.
Which I knew nothing about, but my siblings were more than happy to say.
Your siblings, right? They're the stakeholders in this project. So tell me a little bit about them. What's some personality quirks you're dealing with? Not dealing too much dirt, but just interesting. Like what were the personality differences with the siblings?
Well, I have a sister, my sister Laurie, who's accountant. Right, you would think she might be good at it but she has a lot of time, spends a lot of time at work. I have a brother who's retired with a young daughter who lives in Florida. So he's got a meteorology degree, but doesn't really have a lot of time.
I didn't know that about him. That's totally interesting. Wow.
Yes, very. And I have another sister who is in the mortgage industry. And so she knows a little bit about selling and refinancing of houses, but not an expert on estate planning either.
Okay. So I guess the first thing you're doing, right, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm going to say, yeah, you're wrong, is manage expectations. Was that one of what principles did you apply? How did managing expectations fit in?
So the first thing was to try to get everybody to sort of align on the overall plan, which is, first step is we have to understand what we don't know, which is we need somebody else on the team. We need an estate expert to kind of walk us through this process and to help us. And so identifying the team as you would on a project, we figure out we had a missing skill and we had to go out and find an estate attorney to kind of partner with us to kind of educate us on the steps that we needed to do to kind of walk us through the entire process.
Okay, so before manage expectations, number one is is at least talk to somebody who knows what they're doing, right? Bring in an expert, a subject matter expert into your project, whether what you're doing in your life. It's getting a mortgage, buying a place, buying a car, right? You want to confer with someone besides yourself, right, to help you make the best decision. So,
yeah, and the other thing is that a good project manager knows that you have to be somewhat educated on the project you're managing, right? So lots of times project managers are managing a project where they've never done it before, a software they've never used. But if you don't know a little bit about what you're doing and you get yourself educated, you're much less effective. So for me, it was just trying to educate myself off the internet on sort of some of the basics of estate planning. So I knew the questions to ask, and I kind of had a high level feel of how a process like this might go forward.
Okay. So like a wise man once said, right, with the internet, it's not enough to know, right? You got to know how as well. So
exactly.
Okay. So first step, right, is God, for God's sakes, educate yourself a little bit. Know who your stakeholders are, right? It could be yourself only, or it could be, the kids, family, friends, putting together a vacation, right?
Yep.
Know who you're working with. What's the next one? I'm going to guess, and I could be wrong. Setting deadlines, right? Working from the end date, your drop dead date or blow up date, and then move forward. How would you do that? Like you're planning a vacation, and you're managing the in-laws, your parents, your sisters, your nephews, your kids, but you're the one planning it. So how do you do that? Do you do that? Do you work back from the date, the drop dead date, or how do you start that project?
Yeah, well, first is for a vacation, it's usually understanding who's going on the vacation and understanding what they may want to do. I'm famous for building out the Gary Davis vacation spreadsheet, which is usually a spreadsheet of the activities by day and trying to first of all understand how long is the vacation, how many days is it going to be, right?
Yes.
And sort of figuring out what everybody wants to do and putting it into a spreadsheet and having everybody look at it. So basically have the framework of the vacation. And you're right. Sometimes the end date is important to schedule because someone needs to be home by a certain date. And someday the start date is more important. I can't leave until after this date, but after that, it doesn't really matter when I come back.
I'm curious if you're managing a group of people on vacation, so it depends on the length of it, right? So I'm guessing if it's a shorter amount of time, the more rigid the spreadsheet is, and if the vacation's longer, maybe there's some, kind of personal slack time involved. How does that work for you?
Yeah, good question. So I was told that a vacation spreadsheet takes away the spontaneity of a vacation. And I would say the opposite, which is, boy, wouldn't you hate to go all the way to Paris and not see the Eiffel Tower because you didn't put a little bit of planning into understanding what's to see in Paris because you happen to not be staying near it. So, it's a framework of thinking about ways of building, free time in it, but maybe putting activities that are in the same location on the same day so you can see the most things in the, with the least amount of downtime, but not to overschedule. It's not, here's what we're doing from 9 to 9:15 and 9:15 to 9:30, but sort of just adding a little structure so you make sure you see and do all the things you want to do, and you're doing it in the most effective way to give everybody the most downtime that they would like.
Okay, here's something then. I'm sure my sister's gone through this, right? So she's got 4 kids. They go somewhere, and her and my brother-in-law do something, and then the kids spread out and do their thing. Is there some kind of a software or to make it easier to meet up somewhere besides just random flying text everywhere? I mean, is it is something you can use online that would be family friendly? Some kind of software that you could recommend that people could use for their vacation planning?
Well, I'm sure there is, but me being old school, I'm still resorting to the basics, which is at this point,
at this time,
you're using phones and as a backup plan, aligning on a certain place that we're all going to meet if God.
Yes, that is really old school. At 5 o'clock, we're meeting under the northeast leg of the Eiffel Tower. So.
Yeah, I'll say if everything blows up, then at least we have a backup plan, which is place at this time.
Yeah, because seriously, you'd lose your phone, right? I mean, you got to think about that too. The kids could leave their phone in a restaurant.
Run out of
the juice is out. They get pickpocketed. Phone is gone, which Paris is famous for its well-crafted pickpocketers. So that sounds like a plan. So, all right. Well, hey, we've got the vacation covered. One thing that you started touching upon, I think, is people is family estate, right? And there's lawyers involved and everything like that. And you mentioned you started off with knowing who your stakeholders are, right? Knowing their personalities, knowing as much as you can, right? Suck it up from the internet, and then getting that lawyer. But then, what did you use to assign tasks and deadlines for your siblings, to do, and knowing their personalities?
Yeah. So, after meeting with the estate attorney and him laying out sort of the activities and the sequence, right? Then as part of a project plan, you kind of had to say, hey, which of these activities do we want to take on as the family? Which do we may want to pay the attorney to do, right? And so we elected
That's really good.
We elected to try to do as much of it as we could, right? And so, in our first couple of meetings, it was sort of getting the initial forms that the attorney had to generate in order for us to go ahead and sort of, it's all about taking control of assets, right? So the estate attorney had to create a couple of forms with the government. And then after that, we were able to go out and secure the assets. So my role, of course, was to kind of understand where all the assets are, organize them in a way so that which ones were where. And then, as you said, Bill, make assignments out to each of my family members to say, okay, you need to reach out to this person and sort of understand their process. And here's the forms. And of course, as part of this process, you have to have the formal executor. So my eldest sister was the executor. So I was sort of the project manager. And then when we had to, actually sign things, my sister was the executor.
So she signed. So that was it. All right. So that sounds really good. So there's roles and responsibilities, deadlines assigned to tasks, I assume. What about hauling all that stuff out of your childhood home? I imagine a lot of goods were accumulated in the house. So how did you divvy that up, and were there deadlines assigned?
Yeah, that was probably, of all the activities, that was probably the most time consuming. Anybody who knows who's inherited a house or had to go in and move a parent into their next stage, the difficulty of going through a house that you might have lived in 50 years and cleaning it out. And so unfortunately, only 3 of us were in the area of my 4 siblings, but we also had some children of this. So everybody was recruited.
Free labor, hell yeah! Make them pay their ways, little.
And so Bill, just like anything else, it's a project plan. So first of all, we have to kind of go through and figure out what's the really important stuff, the important papers, things that we might have to save, or things that are family sort of heirlooms that we don't want to necessarily give away. And so having everybody together initially
go through that stuff, right? Yeah,
that stuff.
I want to get rid of it. Difficult. No way. And that's important to me. That Tubbs clown from 1969. I can't part with that, right? So it's
and anyone who's gone through it understands there's a real emotional component to it. I mean, not only are you going through your parents' very personal items, but things that you've grown up with, things that you've attached to. And so it's a very emotional experience for a lot of people to kind of go through that. But at the time, as you said, there's a certain time frame. We wanted to get the house on the market, right? And we have to, we can't spend months and months and months kind of reminiscing. We have to actually, we have an activity that we have to finish, and still trying to keep everybody focused to try to make progress, so that we could get the house ready for sale.
So we've determined you need to establish roles, right? You had an executor, you had a project management, you had stakeholders, managing expectations, deadlines, knowing as much as you can going into this, not just going in cold.
right? And then hiring, then bringing in the outside expert as well. That sounds like a pretty good project to me. One last thing.
There's a concept called continued elaboration, which means at the beginning of a project, hey, you may not know everything, but you know enough to get started. And sort of as you go in there and you get into more details, you continue to build out and continue to assign work. And so, sometimes a project plan sort of builds upon itself as you move forward and as you learn more activity. So you don't need to know everything up front. You just kind of need to be organized about who's going to be involved and what you're trying to do, and just start. And then you can sort of a lot of things you can figure it out as you go along.
We'd like to thank Gary Davis, project manager extraordinaire. To hear this podcast, check out my website, william-mcpherson.com. Once again, that's william-mcpherson.com to hear this podcast and all the others. Hey, thanks for listening, and check out my website at william-mcpherson.com. Building your health and happiness from the ground on up.